Alrighty, we last time put the rigging post on here and the inserts, and now we're ready to rig this and then put on the extension as well as the nose piece. So I'm going to work on the extension first because we're at a stage where we could use that. And the way I set this up is the extension is part of the motor stick. It does hold the rear wing post, but the tail boom will slide onto the extension about 4 inches behind the motor stick, so that the extension goes from behind the rear hook to the tail boom. Our tail boom, as you know, is tapered, and some people do very complex connections here. What I like to do is make a tapered tail extension that will slip inside the tail boom on this end, and we want it to slip in about 3/4 of an inch. So what we need to do is accurately measure the taper of the ID on this tail boom so we know how to make the extension. You can build up the extension with tissue or something, but that gets very heavy in a hurry. Oh, here's my here's my old motor stick, and you can see it's a tapered extension. The rear wing post is on the extension. The extension is glued to the outside of the motor stick at the rear of the motor stick, a little bit of overlap there. And this, let's see how long I made it. This is 4.5 inches long on a 9-inch motor stick. So that makes the total motor stick assembly about 1 inch longer than the design of the Salt Junior. The trend right now is toward longer tail moments, so I thought I would do that. And that seemed to work very well. I got my personal best time with this, even though it's overweight. So how do we make that? How do we measure and make that extension? We've got a template here for cutting out the extension. Let me get my tail boom tool. This is the 3D printed version of the tail boom template. We used the plastic version yesterday, the acrylic. And this one is for Harlan. So the one for the IFSS tail boom form is slightly different. And what this is the same taper as this form, but it fits right here. At the end of this form is at the 0 point on here. And I calculated what the taper was and calculated how tall it would be at this point, 3 inches beyond that. Because the tail boom is going to fit onto this taper somewhere in this area. But if you want 4.5 inches, it's going to go beyond the end of this form, and that's why we have another form. So the 0 point is simply my nomenclature for where is it identical to the Harlan tail boom. So it goes 4.5 inches onto the Harlan tail boom, and it goes 3 inches beyond the Harlan tail boom. Now we need to know where our tail boom is going to fit this. So what I did is our extension is going to be 12 thousandths wood, but use whatever wood you're going to use for the extension. Make this little tool. This one is about 3.5 inches long. That's as long as you're going to need it. And I used the same template to cut it, and I started at the skinny end of the template. So it goes from the 4.5 inch point on the template to the 1 inch point. And what we're going to do, I had to make a new one. I couldn't find my old one. We're going to mark that, that is 1, 2, whoops, no, I'm sorry. That is 2, 3, and 4. So I'm going to put this in a safe place when I'm done with it, and hopefully I remember where the safe place is this time. And then we'll go ahead and mark 1/4 inch increments just like a ruler, a little bit longer at the 1/2 inch, numbered at the full inches. Okay, so now we've got a tapered piece. We built this just like we built the tail boom, but it's just a small section of it. Starting at the 4.5 inch point and going to the 1 inch point. You could probably go from like the 3.5 to the 1, or 3.5 to 1.5 might be long enough. But this guarantees that you've got it long enough to find where it fits. Now you're going to take your tail boom, and I like to do it on the form. Slip your tail boom on and carefully slip it over the measuring tool and see where it snugs up. Okay, and it's snugging up there at the 3.25 inch mark. Let me get a scrap of paper. Maybe. All right, just to verify, we had this was actually, before I trimmed it, it was 4 3/4. So I want 4 inches of tail boom length exposed and then 3/4 inch of overlap. So this comes on to the 3 1/4 inch mark. We want it to extend in 3/4 inch into the tail boom. So that end is going to go to the 4 inch mark right there. So it overlaps to the 3 1/4. 3/4 inch longer will take us out to the 4 inch. So we're going to go from the 4 inch mark, and we want it 4.75 inches long. So we're going to come back this way 4.75. So we're going to go to the minus 0.75 inch mark. So that means to cut our tail boom, we're going to come from the 4 inch mark, I'll just put a dot on it, to the minus 0.75 mark. That defines what we're going to use to make our tail boom extension. So we've made a surrogate extension here, just a part of the extension, and we've used it to trial fit your tail boom. And that's close to where it's going to fit, but I would say it's going to fit plus or minus a 1/2 inch from where we saw there, just depending on how you held your blade when you cut, maybe the humidity, bunch of different things. So now we need to get our tail boom wood, and we'll slice it to fit that template. And then we'll wet it and roll it just like the tail boom. I'm gonna pause this while I look at my options for extension wood. Okay, I've reviewed my sheets. I have them sorted on my spreadsheet by thickness and then by density from lowest to highest. And I took the lowest density sheet that I still have some left, and it ends up being a fresh sheet. This is 4.4 pound wood, 12 thousandths thick, and we'll go ahead and cut from this. So again, we want to go from the -3/4 point, and just like on the tail boom, we want to cut on both sides of this template. We just need to shave off a little bit so we know we've got a square edge, and we're going to go from the -3/4 point to the 4-inch point. At this point, it'd be probably easiest to go to the 4.5 point and then trim it off after we cut it. So keeping the blade as vertical as possible and keeping pressure down on our template. Alright, and we're going to waste a 1/2 inch here, just so it makes it easier to cut. Alright, so we got a clean sliver from one side, and clean cuts on both edges, and then let's mark the approximate location of that 4-inch point, right about there. We're just going to cut that off. I probably could have been smarter about how I did it and not wasted a 1/2 inch of 12 thousandths. Okay, so there's our tail boom or our motor stick extension. We'll go ahead and soak that for about 10 minutes. And we'll come back to that and wrap it. Let's try and be a little bit orderly here. This was sheet 11 out of batch 10. 9, 10, 11. This wood is from Indoor Free Flight Supply. They'll cut you any grain you want, any thickness you want. I think they'll go down to about 5 or 6 thou on the thickness, and they'll cut your density based on the density of the billet, and with plus or minus 1/4. So they'll go like from 4 to 4.5 pound wood and so forth. So yeah, and I would order a variety of densities. You know, maybe order some 3.5 to 4 and some 4 to 4.5, and you'll have different opportunities to use those different sizes. Okay, now while that's soaking, we can start getting our wing posts together. Oh, I did not weigh that blank. My bad. It's too late now, it's in the water. So we will weigh it after we roll it before we seam it. Okay, I have already stripped out a number of wing posts. These are 2 black, which is 044 by 071, 7.6 pound wood. Alright, we're not registering. It's too light, so I'm going to put a blade on there. Alright, 258, 268, so that one's 10. Now it says 244, 259, 238, 255. It says it's about 17. Yeah, that one looks like it's consistently about 17 milligrams. That one is about 12, 14, 14. So 17, 14. 15. I'm going to use those two, 14 and 15. All right. So that is wing post. Weight is 14 and 15. Source was black. Black. Density was 7.6. Looking for my previous build sheet just to compare to the last build. And I found two of them with boron last time that were also from the same batch. So yeah, I had some spares that had boron on them. Alright, so we need to put boron on these couple of wing posts. There's your source, 7.6 pound. There's too black on it. That's probably SIG wood. Some old SIG, since hard to get SIG these days. Alright, setting up for boron. Now the wing posts are going to sit, they're considerably wider than they are thick. So it was like 042 thick and 074 wide. That wide face goes front to back because the load on the wing post is to the side. As the rubber twists your motor stick, you need to transfer that twist to the wing. So you've got the flat side to the front and back here, and you've got boron on both sides here. And that's a critical boron area, and I believe the SALT 2 plans and most of the other plans I've read have you using 4,000ths boron. You can do that or have the equivalent cross-sectional area with 3,000. So you really only need 3,000ths boron. You would put two pieces on each side. And to do that, you can feed two pieces through the boron pen simultaneously. Now I do have some 4,000ths, so I'm going to go ahead and use that. Let me pause to get that. Alright, we've got a piece of 4,000ths boron. I don't have any scraps because I haven't used it before. So we've got a full length piece. And we're going to go ahead and stand our two wing posts on edge. If you see the stripes, it's not on edge. Okay. So the way I made those is I sanded some wood down to 07. No. I sanded them down to 042 and then sliced them 074 wide. Okay, so I've got two of them on there, and what I'm going to do is move this so it ends right at the 10-inch mark, and this one so it ends right at the 14-inch mark. Those will be my signals to stop. And get our trusty little wire in case we need that. Get one of our tips and just touch it to a paper towel to get all the acetone out of the tip. Brilliant, as they say across the pond. Alrighty, take some 90% Duco, insert the needle as far as it'll go, start squeezing. Alright, and then just, hasn't started coming out yet. No, it did. You don't need to fill it all the way. We're not doing a lot of boron today. We will do boron on our extension piece, but that's still got to be rolled and baked. So, alright. Just like before with the 3000 boron, we pump it through here a couple times. Get the end sticking out. And if you, hopefully you don't forget, go ahead and wet it with some dirty acetone. That's the acetone that I keep the boron tip in. So it's maybe 1 or 2% Duco. Just primes the surface, makes it more receptive to the glue. Alright, we're going to stick it out about 1/8 of an inch, clamp it down with our chisel and pull it along. I've done this same thing on the various spars. Break it off, stick out the tongue, pull it along, and at the end rotate up and break it off. Alright. Now we can take those two wing posts and that quickly, I need to clean my ruler because things are sticking a little too quickly there. And we're turning it over 180 degrees, so the boron we put on goes to the bottom. That boron didn't lay down very well. Well, we'll fix it after. Interesting. Okay, got it primed. Get some glue on the end of the boron by pumping it. Clamp it down with my wedge tool. And I find it best on these wing posts to stop the boron a couple millimeters from the end, because you're going to end up tapering both ends a little bit. Alright, so that was pretty exciting, huh? Got our boron onto our wing post. I think we got it on a little dry at one place. I think I need to mix some new glue. I see some little floaties in here and stuff, so this glue actually had gotten quite dry in the bottle, and I reconstituted it with some acetone, and probably should have just cleaned it out and made up a fresh batch. Alright, clean the tip with a paper towel, rolled up and pushed inside, seal it in our bottle, set our tools aside. Alright, I need to look at those. The first side, it looked like it went along a little dry. Even if you're not going to look at them right away, I would cut them off while the glue is still wet, and then you can come back and stick them into the jig to let them finally dry. Alright, I've got just a little section here that did not bond well. So just wet it out with a little bit of 10% glue. Not sure why I didn't get much glue on that boron. I haven't used this 4,000ths boron before. It was given to me to help out with my youth program, and I am not currently directly in-person coaching any youth on F1D. That is coming. I've got 2 prospects here in Tennessee for the next cycle. Alright, that all looks good. If you want, you can squeeze those back between the rulers, but I don't think that is going to go anywhere. You're not going to get a warped wing post. They're so short, and they are heavier wood. Alright, I'm going to put the boron back in its tube to save it for later use. Set that aside. Okay, now it's time to go ahead and roll our tail boom extension. So I need a form. I'll take that surrogate extension off. And if you remember, we cut it to about 3/4 beyond the end of the template, which will put it about 3/4 beyond the end of this form. We don't want to go there, so what we need to do is get a slightly wider piece of tissue and use that to roll it, and roll on a couple of layers before we put the balsa on. Hope that's long enough. Let's see. Yeah, just barely. Probably should have cut it longer. Alright, so this is double-aught silk span like we used for the other tubes. It's hard to find the good stuff. There is some stuff being sold as double-aught silk span, and it's plasticky. It's really weird, and it's not near as thin as this stuff. I like the double-aught silk span instead of tissue because it has a lot more wet strength. And that's why I use it. Alright, we're going to just flip up the edge. It was very close to the edge of my block. Make sure it's completely onto the mandrel. And then we're going to roll. I'm going to hang it off the end of the mandrel. Oh, I see what's happening. It was not lining up. Okay, so we've got about two and a half wraps there. Make sure you know which one's the skinny end. If you're not sure, hold it up to your template and it should be obvious. Okay, that's the fat end. That should go on the fat end of the form. Double checking the length. And I want to put it, alright, if you drop it too early, you can pick it up with a knife. I want to put it all the way out here at where I've got tissue wrapped on the fat end. Drop it down, roll it half a turn, make sure your line is straight, everything looks good. And then make sure you're not getting it bumped up over the previous layer at all. It looks okay there. I have not once had the blue tape ready for this video series, have I? It's alright. Alright, we'll go cook that for 25 minutes at 200 in the toaster oven. And then we'll be ready to seam that and boron that. We can't really start our putting in our wing post till we get the extension part done. So we got a couple other things we can do when I get back. So we're going to pause it here. Alright, that's dried in the oven. It's still a little hot to handle, so I'm going to do a couple other things here. Well, I was going to go ahead and seal up the front and do the rigging. Yeah, let's go ahead and do that. So we need to cut the front off at the angle of this leg, or about 30 to 40 degrees. I like using a Dremel with a diamond wheel, super thin cutoff. I wouldn't use a tough grind or a thick cutoff wheel. Maybe a thin Dremel cutoff wheel would work. Because you're cutting through the boron and the balsa. Just don't overdo it. You can always sand it to final shape. Alright, and then take your nail file piece of the balsa wood that we cut off stuck in there, and I'm going to carefully file it down until I'm right at that piece of tissue on the front where I wrap the tissue around the front of the web. So when I start seeing scratches on that, I'm going to stop. Okay, and if your boron snagging on your sandpaper there, you want to break off a little piece. Get yourself a piece of blue tape, because believe me, you do not want that boron on the floor and eventually in your foot. Okay, looks like the rest of the boron is okay. Now, what we're going to do, go ahead and throw that out. We're going to find a scrap of 25 thousandths wood. I believe that's 25 thou. I'm getting a bit of a mess here. Yeah, 26 thou. And we want the grain to go up and down the face. We probably want C grain. Okay, so you don't need it perfect, just a little bit bigger than that front face. We're going to glue it on, and then we can come in with our emery board, fingernail file, whatever you want to call it, and clean it up. This probably, before you sand it, you want to let it dry for a few hours. We're going to glue it to the tube and to the web. So we want to prime it with some 10% basically over the whole face of this. And then we'll prime all that. Alright, now we're going to put a bead of 50-50 on the web and around the circle, and touch that down. That gets it stuck on there. Rub it down a little, and we're good to go on that. So we don't want to be sanding on it now. We'll break that glue joint. So yeah, we'll set that aside. Let's go ahead and work on this extension tube. Sometimes it's easiest to keep your mind on one thing at a time, but you do get breaks while you're waiting for things to dry. So if you stage things, you can more effectively use your time, or you can just take breaks. Yeah, it depends how much of a hurry. If you're in a big hurry, you can always have 2 or 3 different parts of the plane in various modes of construction, so that you never have any forced downtime. Alright, so I unrolled the tissue, and now I'm opening up the balsa around the tissue and just gently pulling the tissue out from the split in the balsa. We'll get our 10% glue with the brush, just like we did on the motor stick and tail boom, and just squeeze the brush in the gap. So hopefully we're just priming the 2 edges there without doing a lot of goop everywhere. Okay, so that just seals the surface. Get some glue down deep. Now we're going to slip it onto the tail boom form. Take it up to the fat end and get the line straight on the tail boom form, and put a line across the joint. and then we can start seaming it. If it's not quite reaching, you can slide it down the stick a little to a slightly skinnier part of the stick, and it'll reach around and grab. Alright, let's try the 10%. So just, oops, yeah, it didn't quite hold there. I think we're going to need the 50%. I'm going to put on my magnifier so I can see a little better. So I have a little bit more control of where the tip of the 50% glue is going. Start with about a centimeter. Get control of it with that. Get that locked in, and then you can do maybe 2 centimeters at a time. Alright, we got plenty of glue on there, it's just not grabbing, so I'm going back to the 10% so I don't keep adding glue. Just going to melt what's there. I don't know why I'm having a little bit of difficulty here, but just be patient, try different angles with your hand to clamp it and rub it. Eventually you'll get it. Remember, it's the cut size of the balsa that determines the diameter here, not the position on the rod. So if it's not coming together, you can go down the rod. If it seems a bit loose, you can go up the rod to the thicker part, so it'll come in more tangent. But you can have it a little loose and rub it down. If it is a little loose, you're probably a little more prone to getting a teardrop shape. So just make sure you're rubbing it down till the teardrop goes away. I'm thinking you might have better luck if you maybe prime it with the 50-50 instead of the 10%. Main thing is to get this seam done with as little glue as possible, but make sure it's sticking together. Because if you're not careful, you can add a lot of weight seaming it. Now you don't want to seam it off of the form. Keep moving the form to make sure you're not glued to it. So this fatter end, remember, it's cut for 3/4 of an inch off the form, but you're not going to seam it out there. You're seaming it on the form. So it's going to be a little loose here, but you press down to make it tangent at the point where you're gluing. That looks like it went together well. Alright, I think we got it now. Alright. Now we're going to do the same thing on this that we did on the motor stick. And that is mark the seam at the fat end. And then we're going to go 90 degrees to the seam, but we're going to, it's not critical, but I like to line it up with the boron we've already got. So that's off to the left side. We're going to go 90 degrees from the seam for one mark, and then 120 to each of the other marks. And I'm just eyeballing that like a peace sign. Alright, we got our 3 marks. We're gonna, oh geez, did we lock up? No, we're still going. Okay, gonna put it in our boron application framework here. Clear some space. Always too much junk around. Alright, and we need our 2-inch straight edge. Set it on the line where we want the boron. Make sure it's straight along the taper and tape it down. Now we're going to prep the boron pen, and let's see if we have some small pieces of boron here. You don't need to see me looking for my boron. Alright, we've got 3 pieces of boron that are about the right length. You could use one solid piece of boron and just break it off as you go. But I like to use up my short pieces, and since I have some pieces that are just the right size, if I had some, say, 7 or 8 inch pieces, I wouldn't want to use them here because this is just 4.5 inches, and now we'd be left with something like 2 or 3 inches, and eventually you get to little pieces that you can't use. So I happen to have 3 that are real close to the right size. That's great. We'll add some 90% glue to the applicator. We're not going to need much. Put that in the pen. Got our hole down there. We're going to take our dirty acetone and just zip along there to prime that surface. Get our first piece of boron. Pump it around a little bit to wet the end. Stick it out. And Again, using the 2-inch straight edge here as a guide, we can get it perfectly straight. Break it off at the end. And rotate. We've got a short 3/4 inch piece or so that we broke off. We were a little bit long on that piece, so we gotta get that out of the gun or the pen. Prime it. Pump it in and out a little, make sure you're wetting the end. Get your chisel, hold it against the straight edge, clamp it down, drive it along. Now on that one, I forgot to go up and break it, so it's hanging off the end. We will deal with that when it's dry. Third piece of boron. Wet the surface. And lay down the boron. Again, using the straight edge as a guide. You can pinch it on the pen a little bit, gives it a little bit of tension. Break it off a millimeter or so short of the end. Got a little tiny piece in there we'll have to deal with. And the better way to deal with it, instead of putting more boron through there, is get your piece of wire, pass it through, and that came out. It's on my piece of wire now. Get a piece of blue tape. No, maybe it didn't come out. It must have. Get this other one too. Those are too short to worry about. Put my throw our tip in our bottle. Better to clean the glue out of it first. I didn't that time. Whatever. Alright, so we've got the boron onto that. We're going to let that dry a few minutes. I'm going to pause while I clean up a little bit here. Alright, next step, we're going to fit this tail boom or motor stick extension to the back of the motor stick. And because we've got the smaller diameter motor stick, it's quite a loose fit on there. We don't want to fill that all up with glue, and even tissue would be too much. So what we're going to do is take a scrap. This is 12. You can maybe use some 12, maybe use some 8, and just cut a strip off maybe 2 millimeters wide, cross grain, so the grain will easily wrap around here. And then we're going to wrap it on like it's a piece of tissue, but if you had to build up that much thickness in tissue, it'd weigh a ton. So we're going to build this up with a little bit of balsa. didn't quite go all the way around. It's close. And it looks like it's going to be close on thickness there. I usually use scrap of 9, but this seemed like it had a big gap. I'm using whatever seems appropriate on the glue at the time. I put a thin bead of the 50% on it first. Now to just get the ends to behave, I was just using a little bit of the 10%. Line the seams up on the top. Okay, that's got a nice snug fit to it now. And it's slipped on to the hook here, and that gives us about 2 millimeters of overlap. If you've only got 1 millimeter behind the hook, you can put a little slit in the extension and slide it past the hook. But this is fitting nicely. And now the trick is to get this straight. Now first thing I notice here is that this bottom boron is going to line up directly with the tail hook here. So I want to rotate this a little bit, get that boron off to the side, because we're going to stick a wing post through this. Make sure the top boron hasn't rotated into that position. So top boron is off to the side a little, bottom boron is off to the side. That's the critical thing. Okay, so the hook here is just inside the boron. Okay, we will go ahead and prime this with some 10% prime or pre-glue, whatever you want to call it, and just a little bead on the inside. Don't get carried away with your glue. Now it's going to be easiest to put your 50-50 on the outside of the motor stick, not on the inside of your extension. And then quickly slip this on. Double check that the boron is not in the way. And now to get it straight, what you do is hold it up to the window and rotate like this while looking at a vertical line like the edge of the window. And just tweak that straight while the glue is still soft. So I'm holding the motor stick and rotating with the edge of the motor stick parallel to the edge of a window or a neighboring house or something like that. Just rotating and watching for that extension to wobble. It looks real good right now. Check it a few times while it's starting to set up, and then you don't want to mess with that while it's drying. Alright, so we've got the cap on the front, we've got the extension on the back. We got to rig it, and we got to put in these wing posts. So while that's drying a little, we'll prepare our wing posts. You want to taper both ends, and they're different. So the bottom end, we're going to taper at about a 45-degree angle in all four directions. And basically we're going to do that until we sharpen it to a point down there. So just like our rigging post, we want to have a point that sticks into the hole at the bottom of the motor stick. Then the top, I'm just going to, at a shallower angle, taper just the two edges that have the boron, the skinnier edges. Maybe just a little bit of cleanup all the way around. You're tapering that so your tissue tube easily goes on. If your boron is in the way or is trying to go into the taper, it's gonna pop out of there. You want to break it off short and rub it down with a little dot of glue, because the boron won't make that angle change. Okay, so we've got that sharpened to a point. Then the top end, just dress it up a little bit. Okay, so this one, the boron is extending just past the end on one side. So get your piece of blue tape handy. And I'm just going to come in and break that boron off a couple millimeters from the end. The blue tape catches it, and that was a fairly violent process, so you're going to want to, it actually popped the boron loose for about a centimeter as that vibration from breaking it runs down the stick. It's critical that you get the ends up top of the boron settled down, because you're going to be slipping that tissue tube on and off of there a lot, and you don't want it slipping underneath the boron. This one's a little close. I'm going to just break it off. You're better off just not running the boron quite to the end. It's not adding any real strength at the top end there. It's just no load, no bending load at the end. Okay. Now normally I'm going to set this wing post back about 1.7 inches from the front of the prop hanger. But because our tail boom's a little bit heavy and a little bit longer than normal, I'm going to move back to about 1.85 inches. And that's from the front of the bearing to the front of the wing post. Okay, and then you're going to go back, make another mark for the back of the wing post. There you go. And you're going to go 7.8 inches from the back of the front wing post .8, so mark it at the end of the ruler here, and that will be the front of the rear wing post. And I like to put a second mark for the back of the rear wing post, but the front of the rear wing post and the back of the front wing post are the critical points, because that's your 7.8 inches, which is your wing chord. Okay, now we're going to go back and with a pin, got a bent pin. We're going to put a pin right between those two lines and in line with the rigging post, and we're just going to sight down the motor stick, get it parallel, get it perpendicular looking from the side, parallel to the wing post, to the rigging post looking from the front, and it came out right by the boron. So I'm actually going to move both of the top and the bottom off to the side a 1/2 millimeter, so we're not coming through that. Really just the thickness of the pin toward the left. It looks like we're not quite on center anyway. Okay, now just like the rigging posts, we're going to use our microfiles here, and where the wing post comes through on the top, it's going to be a rectangular hole. And better to cut a little at a time, trial fit your wing posts, come back and cut a little bit more. Because if this gets wallowed out too big, then it's going to be really hard to tighten it up. Alright, now on the bottom, just like we did before, we're going to wallow out a pretty small round hole. And then we're going to move the wing post around until that tip of the wing post comes through the bottom. Now we can check if it's perpendicular, and the easiest way I find to do that is with an index card, so let me get one. So just put that parallel to the motor stick, and that is leaning back just a hair. It's pretty close to vertical. And sight down it, make sure that we are parallel to the rigging post. It looks like my bottom hole has to move away from the boron just a little bit. So that's why we made such a small hole on the bottom. Now we can just wallow it the tiniest bit away from the boron. And now it's going to stick through just a little bit further. And now we're perfectly parallel to that rigging post. Now we've got it sticking through just the tiniest amount. We're going to prime the area with some 10% glue. Let that soak in a second. And then a little bit of 50% glue, and that gets us in there. Normally, I guess I rig this before I put these posts on, but that's okay. We'll rig it next. pause. Alright, just had to deal with a little issue. Alright, now the same thing is going to happen at the back here. We're going to put the pin in between the two marks on the extension and in line with the other two posts. So we're just going to poke it through the roof there, make sure it's in line. Then we can poke it through the bottom just a little bit, and it's way off on angle, so we'll make an adjustment. That looks real good there. Looks pretty good perpendicular front to back. So we'll mark where the pin is, top and bottom, and that will become the center of our hole. Once again, we're going to wallow out both sides symmetric to that. Alright, I've actually split my seam a little bit there because the glue from the seam strengthened the wood around it, and I had to file a little too aggressively. Rather than using my finger, I'm using the Teflon tube on this applicator to rub down a little bit. Can't really press real hard because you're not on a form. Going side to side, you're going across the grain, and it's a little harder. It'll cut like butter going front to back. So recognize that difference and be very careful with the microfiles. It's just being stubborn, and it ripped my seam again. I would rather do my patch of the seam afterwards, but I'm just afraid it's going to run away from me. Maybe I need to get myself a finer file. Go with a medium one here. That one seemed to be catching like a saw blade. That was better. Okay. Just got it to where that will fit through, and now I'm going to poke through at the lines crossing on the bottom, make a fairly small, like 1/2 millimeter circular hole, 1/4 millimeter maybe. And get the nub of that to go through there. Alright, now what we see here is I'm leaning forward quite a bit with that stick. So let's pull that back a little, and we're going to have to wallow out this bottom hole toward the front. looks better. Pretty close to perpendicular. And real important to have this parallel to the front one. And then as a last check, what I do is I check the distance between the back of the front wing post and the front of the back wing post, 7.8 inches. Lock it in. Doesn't matter if they're both tilted back a little or tilted forward a little, as long as up at the tops it's 7.8 inches apart. Alright, 10% glue to prime it. Double check our alignment. Double check that the nib is sticking out just a little bit. And then get some 50-50 on there. This rear wing post, that bottom nib, it's a common thing for that to break free. That's your highest stress wing post. Alright, so we've got that. Now I noticed that I never did trim this boron sticking off the end. I thought I had gotten it, but there's about a 1.5 centimeters sticking off the end. So break it off, get it onto our tape. Seal that end down so it doesn't snag on anything. I've got a little bit of loose boron right here, right next to the hole we made, so we probably popped it free. Okay. Typically I'll use the 10% to patch boron if I need to patch boron. Alright, so getting real close on the motor stick. Now I'm going to come in here and sand in toward the motor stick on this cap. If you sand outward, you're liable to pop the cap right off, especially since I haven't let it dry overnight. You can sand to the side a little if you need to, but don't sand forward. Got a little fleck of boron in there. Get that off. Instead of sanding, you can try and carve it a little, especially where you've got a lot to take off. I can feel it's still a little bit gummy on the glue, so definitely want to be careful. I like leaving this till the next day, but the show must go on, right?